I feel like Alan said it best with fantasy books are too dang long. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we're going to be talking about Dawn of Wonder, The Awakening Book 1 by Jonathan Renshaw. And this is one I did a buddy read here in this month of April. And immediately I talked about it. I was sort of regretting it because this is like a 700-page book. Not the best time to do that when you're in the midst of a buddy read, or in a buddy read, of a readathon, and are trying to do a lot. But I ended up getting through. was reading physically, and then I did some on audio as well here, which was really good narration by Tim Gerard Reynolds. I have not listened to a ton of his stuff, so that was nice as well. But reading through this does read pretty quick, I have to say, because I was expecting, just based on the length and size of this book, and I was expecting more like adult epic fantasy. This is more so YA, to even kind of middle grade type of fantasy here, and that's where we get into some of it where I'm like, why is it this long? Because I do feel like this is a bit long for that kind of book. But there are a lot of things that I did actually enjoy about this book too. So we're going to start with the positive, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the things that I didn't like as well. Like kind of being one of them here. But let's jump in here, because this is a book where we have our main character Aiden, and it starts off kind of, with what you would expect in some ways with the story. And Aiden is about 12, and that's where we're dealing with a younger character. And there's a big event that happens at his village. We do some classic stuff where it seems like he's going to be some sort of chosen one, but then him and his family have to end up leaving and going to another place. And I'm saying it's super vague. We're like, the blurb, I'm sure probably gives way more than that, but that's kind of what I'm going to go with. But the beginning of the book opens up where we're getting to know the characters a lot. We're having a lot of really good descriptions of the setting and getting to know a lot of bits and little hints about the world and all kinds of things going on. And that's the first thing that really stands out, is this is a really, really well-written book. I think the author, Jonathan Renshaw, here writes really well, and is also in a way that it's not like condescending to the reader. It's written for a younger audience, but the writing flows really well. The descriptions, the way the characters move, talk, the world, all these kinds of things, I think work out really well. And something that he does a really good job throughout, which I appreciated, is setting things up in a way that it's kind of a double-edged sword, because things are set up or kind of like telegraphed to you so that later when other things happen, it doesn't feel like you sometimes get in younger reading books where like, and then this happened out of nowhere. Everything here is set up, and so it makes a lot of sense. It does make the story somewhat predictable, especially when you're coming at it as an adult. But it's one of those things where it's not really trying to shock or surprise you, or like there's not really big twists where it's trying to do that. It's set up so when you get to things make sense and you can kind of see them there, which I think is a positive thing as well. And the characters, the way that they are written as well, is we do have other characters, and we're primarily focusing on Aiden, but we do have several other characters throughout. I think also are written really well and in a pretty realistic way, and that's something too you get with the main character here, where he's younger and he definitely has some issues, and this does deal with some trauma type things as well, which you can very much see early on as well, where it's going to be going, and more is kind of revealed later, and you see more later. But we're dealing with a younger character who has their own issues, has their own faults and flaws, and them trying to deal with them. And they don't always make the right decisions to do the right things as well. And sometimes there are other characters and also want to tell them to do this way, that way, or the other thing. And we're seeing them kind of trying to find their own way with that sort of thing. That's something you get in this book a lot as well. They're kind of like the life lessons packaged in there, but also not done in a way that feels like it's shoving anything down your throat. It's just you're in this world with this character, you're experiencing it with them, and you're seeing them kind of learn things firsthand. So I think that's a positive thing to have in a book that's intended for a younger audience, where you see the character's not perfect, and they're not just always getting everything right. Like this main character has some issues with, anger and their temper and that sort of thing, which, a lot of kids I'm sure can probably relate to, and that sort of thing. And so you see the character dealing with that, not always in the best way, but it's packaged in a way, it's written in a way that where you see like, oh, hey, this probably wasn't the right thing. And then we see the character, learning and trying to grow. So I think it does a really good job with those types of things, and that's in this type of book. I think that's a good thing to have, once again, with your target audience. And it works pretty well. The problem starts with, I'm not really the target audience. As a 30-year-old man reading this kind of thing, I feel like I probably would have really enjoyed this at 10. And I had a fine time with it now, but that's kind of where, for me, it is one of those books where if this would have been, I think this is where we're going to wrap around into length too. If this would have been half the size or maybe even shorter, I think this would have been excellent. And it's written really well, and obviously adults can read and enjoy books that are for younger audience as well. The fact that, like I commented, this is really, really well written, and so I was really enjoying it at the beginning, and there were other parts that I liked, but it really just is the point where it's really, really long, and the whole kind of middle of the book, we're in one particular setting, and we're really focusing on following what the character is doing, all of the little day-to-day stuff, the minutia, and we're really, really spending just a lot of time that felt pretty unnecessary to me. Now, it makes sense, and we're seeing what the character's doing, and there's lots of other stuff in there, and it does make sense for the book, but it's also just feels like, why did we need to focus quite this much? And I think it's one of the things where you do see sometimes in self-pub, nobody was there to tell the author, hey, you need to cut a lot of this out because you don't need this much. And so it's something that you can see. And I do feel like this book suffers a bit because of the fact that we're really just spending so much time with things. And so kind of by the time sometimes too, we wrap back around to something from earlier, it's like, oh, we're still doing that. We're still talking about that because it's been 200 pages since we brought this up last. And so there were some things too where I'm like, are we just forgetting about this? And then it does come up again later. It's just sometimes it takes so long to get there that was something that I ended up having a little bit of an issue with. Is that sort of thing with it. But I think the beginning especially has kind of an adventure fantasy feel, and I really, really enjoyed those bits. And there were some other things that happened toward the end that also were really interesting, I think, setting up a lot more, because this is the first book in the series, but I think it would have been overall better served and would have been paced and kind of flowed better if this was split into multiple books. Maybe we take we either use a different climax or take the climax at the end of this book and move it way, way up. And then spend some additional time doing some of the other stuff here in a different book. Or, like I said, you could absolutely cut a lot of this book out and not really lose anything. Not to say that it's just pointless stuff happening, but we're just really spending a lot of time with basic day-to-day stuff that's not necessarily needed in the overall story, I guess is the way to say that too. So that's where I do question, and I think, even because it's written for a younger audience in mind, and that's definitely the target audience as well. But I try to think the audience that's in the right age group for this and also is okay with a 700-page book is probably a little bit niche. Granted, I would have absolutely fit that audience when I was in kind of the age group for this. I was reading Wheel of Time books, and it was totally fine with long books in general. But I think that's where you can kind of run into some issues here. Now, what I will say is I do think there are a lot of adult fantasy readers that would also enjoy this. This is kind of a really good kind of intro starter type of fantasy, and not to say you can't enjoy it too if you've read. There are a lot of books I feel like that fall into intro starter fantasy that a lot of people really like because it's just kind of fun, it's easy to read, and it's well written. And looking at that kind of thing, if you like those types of books, I think there's a lot that you will enjoy here as well. It's still pretty long to be in that category, but I think a lot of those things where it's not necessarily doing anything new or groundbreaking. It's just telling a well-written story with tropes and ideas that you've seen before, but also just doing a good job doing it in something that's very, very easy and readable. So if you like those types of things, I think there's a lot to enjoy here as well. So it's yeah, and I've read some of the things like that I know that are really popular, and this is a really high rating and tons of Goodreads ratings. So this appears to be popular, so it makes sense. I get why people like this. It is just telling, using some of those classic fantasy ideas and just, telling a story. And it's like I said, it's really well written. This is definitely a lot better written than a lot of kind of younger stuff that I've read, both as a kid and as an adult. So I definitely will point that out. But it's just, I feel like this one for me, I'm not quite in the range here, and I still enjoyed it. This was a 3-star. This is good. It probably would have been higher had it been quite a bit shorter. And that was a big thing. I just feel like, for me, if you're going to have a book be that long, I really need you to pull me in more. And this book just kind of, for me, started to drag a bit. So that's where did a lot of great things, but also I just think could have been paced better and had a much shorter length overall with it. So those really are my thoughts on Dawn of Wonder by Jonathan Renshaw. Let me know your thoughts if you've read this. Agree, disagree with anything that I said, as always. I'm curious because, like I said, I imagine I don't know how many of my viewers have read it, but it seems like it's very popular, and so I'm curious. Oh, I should have mentioned, because this was sent to me by T from an Erudite Adventure, so I will link his channel down below as well. So thanks for sending here and doing the buddy read as well. I still had a good time with this one too, honestly. It was just it was nice and light and easy to get through as well. So that's for this one, though. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.